I want to thank you for inviting me today. I hope that for the time available that we're able to provide some answers to a number of the questions that you might have about legal aid, but also to provide you with an overview of what the current state is. Things are moving really quickly. The budget was April the 11th. Since that time, we've been having to make a number of changes to policies. So I just thought I would quickly go through what we've done so far, and also provide you with an overview of what we see is happening in the next couple of months, and then open it up for questions.
David, can you move the mic closer?
Okay, how's that? Okay, sorry about that. All right, as I said, things have been moving quickly. The budget was April the 11th, and as you no doubt are aware that we were informed that our transfer payment from the province would go from $456 million to $333 million this year. So that was something that we hadn't anticipated. We thought that maybe we might have a budget reduction, so we had set aside some money. We had additional money from the Law Foundation, which has sort of enabled us to absorb some of that reduction, but still leaves us with about a $75 million gap in terms of where we have to find resources this fiscal year in order to balance our books. So that's a pretty daunting task for an organization in such a short time period. It is April. Time's already wasting in terms of trying to realize savings. So we're working frantically to try to see how we can live within that new fiscal reality. One of the things we've done, and I'm sure that you're aware of, is that we were also advised by the province that refugee and immigration services would be covered only within the funding from the federal government. This has meant that we had to make some immediate changes to our coverage in order to bring our program expenditure estimates down to about between $13 and $15 million. Normally, between our office and certificates, we spend about $30 to $34 million, depending on the volumes. So that meant we had to basically cut our services in half in terms of the amount of money that we could spend. So as of April the 16th, certificates for the private bar are available only for the preparation of basis of claim. Our refugee staff offices will be doing primarily appeal work, but also some services such as detention reviews. And we're continuing to honor any certificates that were issued before April the 16th. Since the budget announcement on April 11th, we've been developing strategies that would allow us to work within the new funding allocation, keeping in mind that our priority is to ensure that frontline services continue to remain strong. With that in mind, we are looking at ways to minimize impact on clients, minimize the impact on our staff, and minimize the impact on service providers and stakeholders. But I think given the volume of resources that we have to find, I think it's fair to say that all of those areas will be impacted. But I'd just like to briefly outline some of the strategies for savings that we're already implementing. We're looking at budgets that have been suggested by staff, such as unpaid vacation days, job sharing possibilities, and part-time opportunities. We have provided staff with a month to consider the voluntary exit packages, after which we will review where we are and look at the administrative savings plans that our vice presidents have been developing, and then determine where we go from there. We may ultimately look at other possibilities, including layoffs. We want to be able to provide further information about staffing levels in June. Our priority is to limit impacts on staffing where possible, but we anticipate that these strategies that have been announced in terms of our internal administration will save us about $16 million annually. Other areas we are looking at funding savings include reducing our rental space and leases where possible, and reviewing internal processes to find efficiencies, reviewing our application processes, and eliminating unnecessary steps in our eligibility determination processes. There will be an impact on clinics, totaling $15 million. We're going to be taking back any unspent funding from the clinics, elimination of project funding. We have a number of IT projects in development with the clinics that we're going to be suspending. We're looking at alternative ways to do training. There's a training and development budget which the clinics have, which we're going to be freezing at this point. And we're going to be reviewing the base operations of all the clinics and developing a new target or a new savings or transfer payment to each of the clinics. In terms of the private bar, we're going to be working with the Attorney General to change some of the regulations that will eliminate the appearance and acknowledgement fees that lawyers receive. And we're looking at the possibility of reducing payments on discretions as well. The time period for payments of accounts will be moved from 14 days, which we just changed from 21 days, back to 28 days. Initiatives related to the private bar should realize savings of about $14 million. We're also looking at funding efficiency savings through changes in our certificate issuance policies. Work is being done through our policy department and the districts to identify areas where changes can be made. Our chief considerations are, will the proposed changes leave the client with no other option for service, or will we have a disproportionate impact on specific vulnerable client groups? We're also mindful of the other areas where there is a constitutional requirement for services. This is not only in the area of criminal law, but in child protection proceedings. At this point, we are looking for initiatives that will be immediate, that will allow ease of implementation. Other initiatives, such as changes in triaging, tightening of application criteria, may be necessary, but that'll take longer for us to implement. As I said earlier, our chief priority is to keep frontline services strong. This is because ultimately our concern right now is to be as best we can and meet the client's needs that we have. In 2016, we approved the development of a racial knowledge community strategy, and I thought it would be useful in this context to talk about who our clients really are. We developed a strategy where we started to ask clients questions related to race and ask them to self-identify. And I thought I would share just some of the preliminary data that we have in that area. Approximately 15% of all certificates issued by legal aid are for clients who identify as First Nation, Métis, or Inuit. Although only 2.8% of the population identify as Indigenous, more than 1 in 5, 21% of our criminal certificates clients identify as Indigenous. Approximately 32% of all legal aid certificates are issued to clients who self-identify as racialized, and this does not include those who self-identify as Indigenous. Although only 4.7% of the population of Ontario identifies as Black, approximately 17% of all LEO certificate clients identify as Black. It is estimated that 1 in every 3 certificates is issued to a client with a mental health or addiction issue. In domestic family law, over 65% of legal aid clients indicated that they have experienced domestic violence. These are just some of a few of the details about the clients we serve. Every day our clients receive services in a variety of ways through the help from private bar lawyers, staff lawyers, legal aid clinics that serve over 700,000 clients a year. This mixed model of services has and will continue to serve the clients well. Our role is the same as it has been since legal aid was created 20 years ago, to provide effective, efficient legal aid services for low-income Ontarians. We are taking immediate steps to begin to operate within this new allocation. We have a very challenging task ahead of us, but we have dedicated staff, stakeholders who see the value of our services, and we have a clear mandate. We intend to get on with continuing the important work that we have done since the beginning. Thank you. I'm pleased to take any questions that you might have related to legal aid.
So my question is, it's Woodell from TLA, is have you thought about any ways in which we, the members of the bar, can help you to get your funding back?
That's a very tricky question. I think that, you know, people need to look at the stats and decide what the impact will be. I've outlined what we're having to do short term in terms of our saving strategies. I think it's fair to say that these savings ideas will have or already are having an impact on clients. As an organization, we wanted to make sure that we've kept the record accurate, identified, you know, what the issues are we're facing as an organization, what the expenditure impacts are in terms of the financial dollars. We've also talked about service levels and the amount of services that we've provided with the resources that we've received in the past. But I think that anything beyond that is really not my mandate as the president of Legal Aid.
Good morning, David. Jane Robertson, currently treasurer, formerly the LAO chair. This isn't a question so much as a statement for the room. When I was in the LAO chair position and David first started, I kind of didn't have much to do because LAO got, what was it, $84 million? I mean, you stepped into the role and there was money everywhere. And so where normally I would be looking for, you know, criticisms to bring against Legal Aid Ontario, push a button here or there. They really, because they were looking for ways to give money away. Every conversation I had was, well, you tell us what you need. If you want to come up with some ideas, we'll construct. And so I just wanted to make a point that you started on the upside of the roller coaster, and we're still here, but it's very much the downside of the roller coaster. So for me, it's just a statement of there really are a whole lot of things in our lives that we don't have a lot of control over, and we just have to do the best we can. And thank you, Margaret, for making that pitch, because I do think that we as a community need to pull together and just generate all of the ideas that we can, and in a lot of ways, there's just some things we're all going to collectively going to have to suck up.
Thank you.
Nathan Baker, Peterborough. Is this a situation where legal aid is sort of everything's on the table and you're considering, reviewing whole programs, senior counsel roles and per diems versus, staff lawyers and the unionization of staff lawyers is changing all that? So is sort of everything in the air, or is there any focuses right now?
No, I think we've given each of the VPs, the regional VPs, a target. That includes staff. I mean, one of the challenges we'll have with staffing is if we're scaling back and, some of our duty counsel, for example, take the packages or we don't fill those vacancies, we still have to provide services in the courts. And then if we have to hire per diems, they can be more expensive. So it depends, there's a lot of moving pieces to this, but everything's on the table.
Are there statistics to demonstrate that per diems are more expensive? Just when you look at retirement package and benefits and all the rest, and staff too.
Well, we just
support.
negotiated a contract with the Society of United Professionals, and certainly we did the math. In certain locations, the volume of work makes more sense to have staff. Old City Hall, College Park, where we have high volume cases.
Right.
But there are locations where per diems make more sense, and that's the math that we've done. We certainly presented that to the union and said, if you guys are getting too expensive, then we have alternatives. And so we have negotiated a package with the union in recognition that the fact that we do have alternatives in some locations, it is more economical to have per diems.
So you might move towards a system of having both, depending on where you are geographically within the province, perhaps?
I think we already have that in lots of locations. We use per diems in a number of locations with staff, and we have to backfill sometimes using per diems. That will always be part of our model. I mean, I think it works well. The variation in the mix between the two does vary depending on the cost. I mean, if the tariff went up for private sector lawyers, then that would be something that would perhaps lean it towards staff, and the reverse is true as well.
I take it we're not looking at tariff increases right now.
I wouldn't think that's on the cards, no.
I don't see anyone else coming forward for questions, but David, just quickly, in looking at your saving strategies while you were speaking, I believe the tally's around $71 million.
Right.
We have $133 million reduction. We have $62 million left in the balance. And does the Law Society of Ontario Foundation funding make up that balance for this target year?
There's two ways we were able to address the 70 million. It makes up the majority of the savings of the 133. We also had an increase. We've had an increase of about $30 million from Law Foundation revenue over the last year. We're keeping our fingers crossed that interest rates don't go anywhere. We're very dependent on the Bank of Canada's fiscal policies. So that makes up part of it. We also had implemented some saving strategies internally before we knew what our numbers were. So between those three combinations, saving strategies that we've already implemented, these new ones that we referenced today, and the Law Foundation would balance the 130. But we do have some transition costs as well. I mean, some of these things it's going to take time to implement, so that's something that we're going to have a challenge addressing.
Since you are tied to the Bank of Canada with respect to the Law Society Ontario Foundation funding, is there any movement afoot right now or potential in the future to try to negotiate a more stable relationship in terms of that funding, which isn't based on interest?
We haven't really explored that. I mean, I want to congratulate the Law Foundation for doing a great job of making sure that the interest from all the mixed trust accounts is accounted for and is collected. Some of the banks had, though I think they did a good job sort of making sure that all the trust accounts are identified and the interest is going to the Law Foundation. So, that number is increased over the last 3 or 4 years significantly, and it is dependent on what happens in the interest rates and also what happens in the real estate market. So it is something that we're paying attention to, but I don't really think it's one of the things I would be very hesitant to be more dependent upon. I mean, we've seen it go up. In 2008, our interest from the Law Foundation went from 50 million to 5 in 1 year. So being dependent on that kind of funding is not, I think, an appropriate way for a public sector organization like ours to really be financed. But that's a risk that we're running right now.
Any other questions from the floor? Just one other then, David, if I may, while we have the time. Any movement with respect to the legal aid and discussions directly with the federal government in order to increase that refugee and immigration financing?
Well, I mean, before the fiscal year even started, we have to table a business case with the federal government. All in, we spend about $45 million on everything that's provided to the area of refugees. So the federal government is aware of that number. Their base number with us is about $7 million, and this year in the federal budget, they've increased this to about 15. But that's still a long way to go in terms of the gap between the two, and we have a number of organizations that are pressuring the federal government for additional resources. But I mean, that was one of the things that was very clear in the budget, is that we were to spend only federal funding on refugee services, and that's why we had to scale back immediately what we were doing.
Any other questions from the floor? Okay, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, did you have something? No, okay. Thank you very much for taking time to be with us and to answer our questions and to address us today.
You're welcome.